Are you ready? I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. So I want you to get your Bibles. Go to the book of Romans. That's where I'm going to be working tonight. The 8th chapter of the book of Romans, and open up your heart for the word of God. And to those of you that just logged in, if you did not get an opportunity to give, throughout the class, the prompters are going to come up, giving you an opportunity to sow into the word, the rich soil of the word that I'm going to be sharing tonight. I believe it's going to bless you. I'm excited about sharing it. Don't miss the opportunity to become one with the text by allowing the word to not only attach in your spirit and in your heart, but affect the way you give and the way you live. Okay? We're going to be in Romans chapter 8, verse 18 through 30. And if you're ready, we're gonna work through this, and it's gonna be good. I got my Bibles out, I got my pads out, I got my notepads out. I'm ready to get down in the Word of God. Now, I'm going to be talking about leaning into uncertainty. And that's not something we normally want to lean into. That's something we normally back away from. But I want to talk to you tonight about leaning into uncertainty and what happens in the life of a believer when we lean into uncertainty. We got a lot of ground to cover tonight, so let's start. I'll be reading out of the NIV, okay? And I think you'll be blessed. Romans 8, 18 through 30. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our body. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is not hope at all. Who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And He who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance to the will of God. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the image of His Son, that He might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And those He predestined, He also called. And those He called, He also justified. And those He justified, He also glorified. Now tonight, brothers and sisters, the ladies and gentlemen, Christian friends, and those who are just observing out of curiosity, we're going to be talking about leaning into uncertainty. But as a preamble to it, I want to point out that we are dealing with the book of Romans. And that alone, that Paul is writing to a church. It is a church, a group of believers in Rome that he looks forward to seeing. Most people think that he wrote this while he was in Corinth in anticipation of his journey to the Roman church. And he writes to them, and it is originally called the Epistle of St. Paul to the Romans. And then it has later been abbreviated to the book of Romans. We understand when we look at this text that this is more than just a letter. It is much more than a letter. It's almost a dissertation, as it were, to the Roman church. But what I want you to notice is the term Romans itself really flies in the face of the way that we think about faith today, to think that faith ignores culture. It transcends culture, but it does not ignore culture, or we wouldn't have books like the book of Hebrews and the book of Romans that are cut to the continuity of nationalities. And yet we as Christians and believers are often offended, or we raise our eyebrows at the African Methodist Episcopal Church or the National Association of National Association of Colored People. We raise issue to anything that is specific to a nationality, or specific to an ethnicity, or specific to a culture, but our Bible is specific to cultures, being able to speak the same truth, but in the language that is accessible to different types of people. Yeah, that's something to think about. That's something to think about. And when we have these contemporary debates around black Christians and white Christians and so forth and so on, and we have this notion of God's colorblindness, we ignore the Greek Orthodox Church. We ignore the fact that God doesn't have to go blind to what he created. He can speak to the continuity of each of us and love all of us equally without having to look over anybody's uniquenesses to reach them. Hence we have the book of Romans, because there are certain examples that are given to the Roman church that would not be necessary to be given when writing the book of Hebrews or some other epistle. And Paul has the ambidextrous ability to become all things to all people, that some might be saved. Some people can't do that. Some people aren't multifaceted enough to speak to different types of people and still be true to the core mission of the church and the soundness of the gospel. But Paul exemplifies it to us in writing to the Romans, period. He bypasses through mail all the other cultures and goes right into the substratum of the unique nuances surrounding the Romans. Because Paul is grace that way, and he says, I became all things to all people that some might be saved, because he has the ability to be translucent, as it were, in his thinking and his theology, to be able to blend into various settings. Do you? It's important to think about. But let me stop playing around and get down to business. But before we get too deep into it, I often wrestle with what affects us the most. Do we as Christians affect the culture without the culture affecting us? Or are we affected by the culture? And why am I talking about this? He says, I consider that this present suffering, let me put it right in the language that he uses. I consider that our present sufferings are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. And I wanted to talk about our present sufferings and how do we experience God. He's one God. There's no question about that. Behold, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one, and besides him there is no other. But how we experience him has a lot to do with where we are seated. Let me go down into this a little bit. I noticed when I was a little boy, we used to sing songs like I'm going through with the Lord's despised few. It's a hymn. You might not know it, but it was a hymn that we sung. You can have this whole wide world, but give me Jesus. I'll take Jesus for mine. Long as I got King Jesus, I don't need nobody else. All of these songs are born toward or in the midst of the Depression. And we almost demonize success as if it were success or Christ. You one or the other. Give up the world and come on. And give up the world meant give up stuff. And the church sung a lot about that when they were broke. But when times got better, people stopped singing those kinds of songs, and they started singing songs like, I am the seed of Abraham, that I'm blessed in the city, I'm blessed in the field, I'm blessed, I'm blessed, I'm blessed. And we start singing about blessings. And I wondered as we took that turn, and nobody's singing I'm going through, and nobody's talking about silver and gold have I none, and nobody's talking about suffering. I wonder if the culture affects how we experience God. Let's go deeper. Can you think with me tonight? Come on, think with me tonight. I know several CEOs of Fortune 100 companies that are Christians that really love the Lord. But how they experience God versus this other group I know, for example, who are incarcerated and locked up in prison, and they're only let out at certain times to worship the Lord from a cell block, is different from how somebody in a third world country who may be on the lower end of the economic spectrum of that country, they're all praying to the same God, but how they experience that God has a lot to do with where they are seated. And I suggest to you, my brothers and sisters, that the sufferings of this present time, not being worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us, is a declaration of where we are seated. Because this suffering of this present time and this whole notion of God being the God of the oppressed, and I embrace that fully, and he cares about the oppressed and he cares about the downtrodden. Please don't misunderstand me. I absolutely get that. I am a proponent of it. I believe it. I understand it. My only question about it is when the oppressed cease to be oppressed, does God cease to be their God? If he is the God of the oppressed, when the oppression is over, are they then forsaken? So the reality is, while we have one God, we sit in different perspectives, and the bank president experiences God in a different way from the job applicant who is believing God for a job. Okay. And the president is believing the same God, but not for a job. And their faith is pointed in different directions. And what they are happy about and what they're excited about and what they claim to be a great message has a lot to do with where you were when you heard it. The greatest sermon you ever heard came from not so much the lips of the preacher, but it was great because it was ministering to where you were seated at the time. Paul writes about the sufferings of this present time. And I thought it was interesting to talk about it tonight because of the sufferings of this present time. And even in this present time in our country, in our world, the sufferings of this present time depends on where you are seated. Whether the sufferings of this present time is the fear that your retirement, your 401k plan is going to be eaten through, or whether the sufferings of this present time is that you lost a job and your children haven't eaten in 2 days. We don't even suffer a lot, but we all suffer. Yes. the successful suffer, the unsuccessful suffer. No one escapes suffering when it's suffering time. And I want to suggest to you that the suffering is more paramount in this Western culture that we live in, because we have for years taught and expressed a God that almost started to sound like Santa Claus. It's yours, it's mine. What God has for you is for you. I'm not against any of those songs. I'm not against any of them, but I'm talking about how we experience God, and how we express that experience has a lot to do with where we are seated. When God says to Moses, I am that I am, it certainly embraces the fact that God can be and do whatever he wants to do, that he's sovereign, that he's absolute. But it also expresses the fact that he is not definable, because how we experience God is as diverse as the eyes that behold him. And Paul writes in this text about the suffering of this present time. He rips the Western world scab away from our thinking that experiencing God is all about stuff. Though God does bless his people, it's not a transactional relationship. It's not a transactional relationship. It's not the kind of relationship where I give you my life, you give me a car. I give you my life, you give me a house. I give you my life, you give me a degree. I give you my life, you give me a wife. No. This is not transactional. And I talked about this previously, whether you have really learned how to abase and abound. This relationship cannot be based on circumstances that might be occurring at this moment in your life. And Paul now centers into, in NIV it says I consider, but I like the King James language here. He says, I reckon that the sufferings of this present world, and listen, he's showing you how he thinks about suffering. So when he's showing us how he thinks about it, he says, I couldn't stop the suffering, but I changed the way I thought about it. I reckon, I reason, I rationalize that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared on a scale compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. I want to get down into this because I think it's important that you understand it, because this is a time that all of us are experiencing some degree of suffering, whether it's anxiety, whether it is reality, whether it is impending danger, whether it is past trauma, whether it is the loss of loved ones, whether it is the uncertainty, the ambiguity of what's going to happen next. We're not sure. We think that we have a vaccine coming. How that's going to work, we're not sure. How it's going to work on different age groups and different types of body conditions, we're not sure. Will there be any kind of side effects? We're not sure. How long will it take to get it? We're not sure. We think it will bring the economy back. We're not sure. The ambiguity, uncertainty is torture to a soul that likes to settle into absolutes. But what do we do when we're going through a time where there are few absolutes and we are uncertain? And we don't know when the phone rings what's going to be on the other end. When we open up an email, we don't know what it's going to say. When people text us, we have certain anxieties because we're uncertain, because we're living with uncertainty. But Paul says, if you can't change anything else, change how you think about it. He says, I reckon, I decided, I think about it this way, that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. He said, I couldn't change the suffering, but I changed the way I thought about the suffering. Are you getting anything tonight? I couldn't change the fact that my husband left me, but I changed the way I thought about being left. I couldn't change the fact that I lost my business, but I changed the way I thought about losing my business. I couldn't change the fact that we had to downsize our dream home and now I'm back into an apartment, but I changed the way I thought about it. I reckon that the sufferings of this present world, I couldn't change the fact that I had been infected by the virus, but I changed the way I thought about it. I couldn't change the fact that I had a miscarriage, but I changed the way I thought about it. He said, I weighed it on a scale and decided that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. In other words, I don't know how he was suffering. I don't know what was going on in the country at that time. I don't know what was going on in Corinth that precipitated the writing of this letter. And I definitely don't know what was going through his mind at the moment that he picked up his pen and talks about the suffering of this present time, because he's suffering in a way that he doesn't tell. And some of us in the Bible class right now are suffering in a way that we do not tell. It's just the sufferings of this present time becomes a catch-all category for things that are not even mentionable. He doesn't tell us with specificity what the sufferings were, but he does tell us with great clarity how he thought about the sufferings of this present time. I reckon. So the text starts out with how he thinks about it, that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory that shall be revealed in us. He threw his anchor forward. So what he does is saying, better is coming. Better is coming. Better is coming. And better is so much better that it's not even worthy to be compared to the sufferings that I'm going through right now. Are minuscule. They're myopic in comparison to the magnitude of the glory that shall be revealed. It's God giving us double for our trouble. It's increase. It's abundance. It's the harvest being bigger than the seed. It's the fruit being bigger than the root. He says, whatever I'm going through right now doesn't even compare to the glory that shall be revealed in us. So watch it. So I may have lost some things. I may have lost a limb. I may have lost some time. I may have lost some friends. I may have lost some opportunities, but I refuse to give up my hope. Hope centers around the glory that shall be revealed in us. Now, what kind of glory that is, I cannot describe to you. I do not know whether that glory is tangible or spiritual. I do not know whether that glory encapsulates the way that I suffer. I don't know that God is going to return it to me in the currency of my suffering, or if the suffering is going to be the economic currency of a transition. That is to say, I take currency and use it to get other things. I don't know whether God is going to reward me in the way that I suffer, or the way that I suffer is a down payment on a glory that is much bigger and more important than how I suffer. He said, but I know it is not in vain. My suffering is not in vain. My suffering is not abuse. My suffering is not that God has turned me over to the enemy and allowed him to have his way with me. My suffering is going to have a result. I tell you what I like to think of. It's like the suffering you have before surgery is very painful. I generally don't get a surgery unless there's enough pain that drives me to the hospital and makes me have to have a surgery. And at the point that I get ready to have surgery, I have suffering to trade pains. I know when they roll me into the operating room, I am going into the room because of pain. And I know that if the surgery is successful, I will still have pain afterwards, but it won't be the same pain. The pain before the surgery is a pointless, endless pain. The pain after the surgery is the pain of recovery. And it's a little different in the way I process that pain, because now I know that that pain is healing and not just aggravation. Does that make sense to you? Are you tracking with me? Are you tracking with me tonight? Because where we're going with this, he goes on to talk about the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed, and then he goes into this whole soliloquy, as it were, about the whole creation groaning and travailing in pain. The whole creation is lurching. Imagine a woman on a birthing table with her legs up and her knees pointed toward heaven and her feet planted down on the floor, and she's writhing in pain and her stomach is rolling and rocking. He said that's what's going on with the whole earth. Is travailing. But look at how he describes the pain of the whole earth. He says that the world has gone into travail. Good God of mercy. You can say what you want to, but the world has gone into travail, lurching and writhing, and earthquakes and hurricanes and tornadoes and fires, and the world has gone into travail, and ethnicities, ethnos against ethnos. The Bible says generation in the last days, generation shall be against generation. The Greek word there is ethnos against ethnos. Ethnicities fighting with ethnicities, and the world has gone into a travail. Travailing. The world is travailing. The economy is travailing. The stock market is travailing. The financial health is travailing. The interaction between nations is in travail. The whole earth travaileth in pain until now. And not only they, but we ourselves. Let me find it in the NIV. I'm quoting out of King James, but let me find it in the NIV. He goes on talking about, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly. They groan outwardly, but we groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adaptation to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. He says even the church doesn't escape. We're seeing the outer travail of the world, but we ourselves also groan inwardly. I want to talk to some people tonight who have been groaning inwardly. We have the first fruits of the Spirit, but that does not mean that we do not groan inwardly. That does not mean that we are not in the lurches of transition and that we are not dealing with uncertainty. The whole earth is travailing. Yes, it's travailing with uncertainty, destabilization. Those things that used to be established are now shaking. Those things that used to be absolute are now abstract. Those things that used to be certain and trusted influence